Ahoy, everyone! My name is Bobby Shortle, and I'm here with Nick Rocco Scalia, and we are the Intrepid Filmographers. Every miniseries, we chart a course through the full filmography of an under-discussed genre or journeyman filmmaker. In this expedition, we do our best to try and be explorers, using our years of film knowledge to help guide us, but always being open to discovering new things about the medium we love so much. We are currently starting our new series, the films of Karyn Kusama, and today we get in the ring for her debut feature, Girlfight, and find out if we have what it takes. Nick, how are you doing this evening, my friend?
I'm doing good. Lacing up the gloves.
We're lacing up the gloves.
Getting ready to step into the ring.
We're gonna step in the ring. We're gonna do some training. Gonna punch that speed bag.
There's a lot of speed bag in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Gonna make some intense faces, you know.
Oh man, Michelle Rodriguez glares like nobody. Like, if nothing else, she is a fantastic glarer.
Yes. Oh yeah. She's got the one of the all-time movie glares, 100%. And yeah, we're starting our first new miniseries. You know, we finished up our Joseph Kosinski miniseries last time, and we're going from, I would say, the journeyman category to more of the under-discussed filmmaker category. A little bit of journeyman thrown in there, as we'll see as we go along here. But I think very much we're in this under-discussed grouping with Karyn Kusama right now. And I think we're going to be talking about somebody who has a much more traditional film background, right, than Kosinski. Kosinski came from this architecture background, and now we are moving into somebody who went to NYU film school and always wanted to be a filmmaker, who saw, you know, Eraserhead with her mother when she was a kid and fell in love with it. And then,
just like everybody does. Everyone watches. Yeah, it's a formative thing in people's lives is to watch Eraserhead with your mother. I would give anything. You don't know my mom, but like the thought of watching Eraserhead with her fills me with joy. And I hope someday maybe we can do that.
And yeah, she always wanted to be a filmmaker, and this ended up being her first film. And, you know, we were putting together our usual dossier, and it was a little bit tough to find stuff on the making of this movie and the kind of Karyn's sort of history and life before, right? So, I mean, obviously we both watched the movie. I watched it on the Criterion channel, and they have a special feature sort of like array on the Criterion channel. So I watched this really good interview with her where she talked about a little bit about her life and a little bit about, you know, the making of this movie and how she came to make this movie. But, you know, and I also listened to there's also a commentary on the Criterion channel that you can listen to for the movie. And I listened to some of that as well. So, you know, there might be able to add a little bit to what we're talking about here as we go along, but, you know, a little bit of background on Karyn. She was born in 1968 in St. Louis, Missouri. So another Midwesterner starting out. Daughter of a Japanese-American child psychologist and a Scot-Irish occupational therapist, thus her name. She was inspired not only by David Lynch when she was an aspiring filmmaker, but by people like Martha Coolidge and Amy Heckerling. She graduated with a BFA from the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU in 1990 and began a film career in earnest as an assistant to John Sayles, who's the director of 8 Men Out, Lone Star, etc. A big force in the film industry in, you know, the 80s and 90s. And
such a cool mentor for a young filmmaker, right? Like I kind of like her origin story because she graduates in 1990. She goes to work for John Sayles as an assistant. He is like he has such an incredible career. We probably won't get to, he's too much of an auteur for this show, maybe. Although he's kind of dabbled in different genres and things like that. But right, like he's like, I think he was the highest paid script doctor in Hollywood for a very long time and has worked on a lot of mainstream stuff, but then has this amazing auteur career on his own where he's making these like multi-layered sort of novelistic independent films. Like, how familiar are you with his, like, I love Lone Star to pieces. I think that movie is just like one of the greats of all time.
I think the only movie that I can think of off the top of my head that I know he directed, and I didn't look into his filmography before we started this miniseries.
I didn't mean to like ambush you.
8 Men Out was
a sales attack on you.
No, 8 Men Out was a much watched movie by me in my sort of early, you know, tween to teen era of sports movie obsession. It was definitely in that rotation. You know, I feel like that movie
kind of an oddball sports movie, but sure.
It was, but it was one of those movies that was in rotation on cable and pay cable all the time.
Big on the video store shelves in the late 80s, early 90s when I was a kid, sure.
Like, you know, you could turn on, you know, HBO or one of even the commercial channels, right? And it would be on all the time. Those kind of, The Natural, all these sort of like sports movies, right?
Sure.
Of that era were playing a lot. And that was one of them. And I was always fascinated by procedurals. I think I've talked about this right before. And that movie has a procedural bent to it because there's this investigation going on in it and all this kind of stuff. And I remember very, very particularly being so enamored as like a 10-year-old or however old I was first time I saw it, that Joe Jackson signed with like the X's or whatever, you know, that he didn't know how to write. And I didn't kind of get it when I was a kid, you know, but it was very powerful in my head. And I think also we were speaking about Kevin Costner before we started up the show. You know, Shoeless Joe Jackson is a big part of Field of Dreams, which I was already obsessed with. So I think 8 Men Out was I was led to 8 Men Out by Shoeless Joe Jackson. So it was almost like IP.
They are, it's almost like a companion piece, but also it's a very different kind of movie. And that's kind of what I was saying about John Sayles, right? Like he's a very uncompromising filmmaker in terms of the stories he's telling and the way he writes, and he writes all his own stuff. Like I said, he's script doctor as well, but you know, he doesn't make movies that are fun, really. I mean, like when you enjoyed 8 Men Out as a kid, it wasn't because it gave you the sort of emotional highs of like a Field of Dreams kind of thing. They are movies that kind of make you work for them a little bit. And they're very, as I said, uncompromising in just kind of the way they play out and the way they're very human stories. Again, Lone Star, every recommendation I could possibly give for Lone Star. That's definitely my favorite of his. But I think it's just kind of interesting that she worked with someone like that. Like, the idea of what Karyn Kusama has done as a filmmaker, right? Like, so she idolizes these female filmmakers of the 80s, right? Your Amy Heckerlings, Martha Coolidge. They're mostly making comedies. You know, she cited like Fast Times as a movie that she really loved and grew up with and was really influential on her. And yet she's never made a comedy. You know, she's dabbled a little bit, like some of her films have comedic elements, like Jennifer's Body has, but you know, it's a Diablo Cody script, which we'll get to. So there's definitely humor in that, but Girlfight certainly is not a comedy. It's much more of a melodrama, certainly in some ways in the Sayles tradition a little bit, but she's kind of got both of those things going on. And I was thinking about that a little bit too. Like, she idolized the female filmmakers of the 80s, and you think about who they were, and most of them, there were few of them, first of all. And secondly, a lot of them were kind of limited to that comedy genre, right? Like not that was a bad thing in the 80s, right? Like, we actually had movie comedies. For those of you who are like under 20 years old, which if we have any fans of the show that are, good for you. Welcome, children.
Yeah.
Gather around and let us tell you a tale. But like, comedy was a very profitable genre at the time. And you know, it's not that like female filmmakers just working in comedy, not that it was a bad thing. They were making money. They were successful. They all had careers that extended. You know, Amy Heckerling made Clueless in the 90s, which kind of was another generational defining comedy. But you know, like, as far as female filmmakers, mainstream female filmmakers to idolize in the 80s, a lot of them were just in that genre and just making comedies.
And there were very few of them even making comedies. I mean, I think,
yeah, sure.
Obviously, we'll probably talk about this in the progression of, you know, Karyn's career, because we're going to see how much gaps there are in the time where she gets to work, and how seemingly scrappy she has to be in order to put together a little bit of money to make a movie that she's interested in making. Right. Yeah. But I think that, it's one of those things where obviously we're in a place where it's a little bit better now. There's more female filmmakers working today and getting more of the attention and plaudits that they deserve. Right. But it was a tough thing then to be looking for a female filmmakers to kind of map a career onto, because they didn't exist very much. You know, I mean, I think that's part of it too. It's not just about the sort of inspirational aspect of being like, oh, this person looks like me or is the same gender as I am or whatever, and I can be inspired that it's a possibility for me. It's also like, okay, I want to have a career like X, and a lot of times, that doesn't, it's not just have to do with gender or race or anything like that. Like you can have that feeling about any career, but breaking in, as a minority in certain industry, it's good to have examples of how that you can make that path in.
Yeah,
and they don't
it's not
exist
there for her. And even in the 90s, right? Like I consider her, even though her first film comes out in 2000, she is, in some sense, she kind of catches like the last gasp of that like Miramax, Tarantino, that 90s indie sort of wave. And there were a lot of female filmmakers working at that time, but like how many of them went on to those amazing careers that like a lot of the guys, obviously there was a lot of sexism in the fact that Harvey Weinstein was the guy running the company that was kind of at the forefront of all this, but also something kind of, curdled a little bit when it came to all of these films, like Allison Anders is one, maybe some that we'll talk about on this show. Like, I'm not sure what she's up to these days.
But in the comedy thing, you're absolutely right. They didn't just used to be the Netflix streaming place, the only place you could make them were in those places. They were huge money makers, and this is not, I mean, people under 20 will also know this because like this was up and until probably 10 or so years ago, maybe a little bit more, where it really died away, right? You were the last sort of the Apatow, which was kind of the last gasp of this, went away, and then it sort of didn't really come back in a mainstream fashion again. Maybe, but that might be changing now, right? Anyone But You made a bunch of money, and that might lead to more happening now. But yeah, it was a big part of things. Not that this is a comedy. I mean, obviously, we're talking about a very, I would say, very understandable movie to anybody of any generation, which is a sports drama, basically,
coming of age,
really coming,
sports movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And then those one of the things I wanted to talk about with her, obviously, is that let's talk a little bit more about the making of this movie. She graduates film school. She makes, she makes shorts in film school. She graduates and she ends up, sort of working or being mentored by Sales and his producing partner, while also working odd jobs and trying to make a living in New York. She ends up joining this boxing gym and bases some of what Girlfight is about, right, on at least the atmosphere that she was encountering there, right? Diana is not, Karyn Kusama in any stretch of the imagination, and she'll say, she talks about this in interviews, but she gets the idea for it there. But interestingly enough, in the Criterion interview, she talks about this was not the first movie that she wanted to make. She had another script that she had made. She said, but it was much darker, much more upsetting, much more edgy, and she kind of pitched it to Sales, or to look at it, and he goes, I want to hang out with the people that are in this Girlfight movie. I don't want to hang out with the people who are in this other movie. Sure. He's like, it's a good script. It might be a good movie, but that's not the kind of movie I'm interested in making right now. So he kind of champions and helps get some funding together for Girlfight, and it basically scrapes together $1 million, right, to make this movie.
It's a very mainstream concept and a very mainstream idea, aside from the fact that the protagonist is female. But other than that, it's a Hollywood genre drama that's been around forever, like since the silent film days. And I think with a different approach, this could easily have been a blockbuster Hollywood movie. And I think that's interesting too, right? Like some of the resistance she faced, like she's pitching this all over the place before Sales steps in and kind of shepherds the project actually getting made. But she's pitching it to producers and they're saying, well, do we have to have a woman as the protagonist? Does it have to be a minority? They wanted a white woman as the protagonist. And, good on Karyn Kusama. It takes a while, right? Like she's from 1992 to the end of the 90s, probably made in 1999 or so. And she really does not let go of what her vision of this sort of needs to be. I don't know if you saw the interview, the same one I did. I think I read it. I don't think it was a video interview with her, where she was talking about her experiences in that boxing gym, where she was like one of the only female boxers there. And she's in the ring with a guy and they're sparring, which is a scene that, like, I think later on, it's not exactly this in the movie. We'll get to this scene because it's a really good scene. But the guy's sort of like whispering to her, like in between punches and dodges and everything else. He's whispering in her ear, like, hit me. Like, you can hit me. I want you to hit me. And she said something about like the intimacy of that really struck her. Like the idea that this is me and some dude just like pummeling the shit out of each other. But also there's this like very sort of close, intimate relationship that we're having in this moment in the ring. And she saw something cinematic, something you could make a movie out of in that. And I think the best parts of Girlfight really do get that idea across a lot. And there's some of the in-ring stuff that really, yeah, we'll talk about our thoughts on this. I mean, Girlfight to me feels a lot like a first movie in some scenes, and then there's other times where it seems very, very accomplished, sort of wise beyond her years kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we can we can talk about start talking about the movie itself. We should say Michelle Rodriguez is cast in lead role. She's never had a speaking role in anything ever. Like not just movies. Like she never was a speaking part in any acting thing as far as, I can see ever before she does Girlfight. So like, she's not a theater actor. She's not nothing. She is as raw. And Kusama has said, like, she's in this interview that, initially in the first sort of, the first auditions that, she would like laugh, at weird times and stop and start again. She's like, stuff that trained actors never do in auditions, right? They never do it. And she's like, initially I kind of wrote her off, that I thought like, this is obviously not the person or whatever. But she's like, I went back and looked at the tapes and I was like, she's like, there's something about this person that is interesting to me. Right. So she keeps bringing her back and keeps putting her on tape, and eventually gets to the point where she's like, this is the person. Like, she's the person to do this.
It's such a good choice, and such a, like, because she did, another interview, she was talking about the other people that auditioned. She wanted someone professional. She wanted someone who is trained, because it was a very quick shoot. It's a fairly low budget movie, and she needed somebody who understood, like, you show up at a certain, like, there is a certain like lifestyle of a professional actor, and she kind of wanted that for this. So she knew, like, to get the movie made, you kind of wanted someone like that. And having those actresses read for her, so they appeared too polished. Like, they did not come off real enough and raw enough. And I think this movie really does a good job of, like, Michelle, it's perfect casting. Like, I don't use that word a lot, but like, I could not see anybody else in that role. And I certainly couldn't see anybody else who had, decades or just like, you'd imagine this young woman would be like a child star that kind of came up through the system and, is just very sort of doing actorly stuff all the time. And Michelle Rodriguez, I really feel like, there's like, it's not a naturalistic movie, but it's a very naturalistic performance. And I think it works perfectly.
Yeah, I think cards on the table. I think Michelle Rodriguez is phenomenal in this movie. And I think for all the reasons that you're saying, right? Where and that's a lot of where I think the movie really gets really right across the board is everything feels very believable to me, right? And Michelle Rodriguez feels very believable in each aspect of this character, right? She is so imposing to me in the ring, right? I believe that she is this physical presence, right? And in the moments where she has to be more sort of open and exposed, I also believe those moments. And I think for this movie to work, you need to buy Diana as somebody who could get in that ring and after a while be trained into being a person who could fight a male counterpart who's been training just as hard, if not harder and for longer.
Which is really interesting, right? Because at first I was like, wait a minute, like, this is a guy she saw the first time she walked into that gym and she's basically housing him. But yeah, there is something, I guess, like, and we'll have to talk about this too, because I think this was intentional, and Kusama said it was intentional. It's the kind of thing that you could say after the fact and would sound believable. But basically what she said was she was going for melodrama with this, right? She really sort of liked the old school Hollywood melodramas. As we said, boxing movies were a thing. There's so many prize fighters. She mentioned On the Waterfront, and there's a direct reference to Rocky, kind of a little joke about Rocky very early on in this movie. So we know that that's a pretty well established thing. But she basically, and this was an interesting thought, like she's talking about melodrama in the sense that melodrama's characters tell you exactly how they're feeling, how they're thinking. It's not a lot about subtlety. It's just more sort of naked emotion, not naked in the sense that it is very humanistic, but in the sense that like you don't have to figure out, what does this look mean that this character is giving this other character? Because I think this movie it's incredibly predictable. It's a very sort of rote sort of plot that takes place here, with the one sort of twist on it being that it's a female fighter, which it's a good twist, right? It's a good sort of inversion of this genre, but it's also playing exactly by the rules. It follows that sort of inspirational coming of age sports movie playbook like to a T, pretty much. But there are these moments of rawness in it that work so well, and that, I don't know, there's like almost this like tension between the just sort of movie stuff, right? Like, because there are scenes that some of the high school stuff, some of the domestic stuff, I find just very, I've used the word sitcom-y about things before. It kind of feels like that. Some of the other actors are kind of playing it a little more broadly than Michelle Rodriguez is. But then there's these moments that, as you were saying, really do sort of hit home realism wise, and they just feel very naturalistic. And the romance in this, I think, plays out in a way that feels very believable for just young people who are not experienced in those sort of things. And, when you're young, it's just stepping into a new environment. And the stuff in the gym just sort of kills. I want to mention, before we get too much farther, the trainer in this movie is Hector Soto. Jamie Torelli. Yeah, he's so good in this. Michelle Rodriguez is fantastic too. He is the other great performance. I've seen him in other things. I know he's a character actor. There's a couple of good character actors. There's Paul Calderon, who plays her father. But this guy the character is beautifully written. The performance is really great. Like, the scenes between the two of them are like, every one of those I thought was just like aces all the way through. And there's some other stuff that I wasn't crazy about, but I really, for a first-time filmmaker working in this sort of very limited, this is a low-budget film, very limited sets. The stakes are beautifully low throughout this movie. Like, we are not going to Vegas at the end of this. There's no huge fight at the end. The fight, there's like 24 people in the room for the fight at the end of this movie, which I think is wonderful. And so I really, really like that stuff. And I love the relationship between these two characters and these two actors. He done some stuff before, and she's kind of stepping into this the first time, and that sort of father-daughter thing that comes about between them is really, really nice.
Yeah, I think, when you have a low budget and you have to make impact with limited resources, it's so important. It's so important to cast the right faces to be in your movie, right? Even forget about the acting ability verbally, right? You need faces that are going to tell a story, and Michelle Rodriguez's face tells a story always. Like that first shot where you're sort of in the school, in the lockers, and people are going by and the camera's sort of getting closer to her, and she kind of just looks up at the camera. And I think it tells you pretty much everything you know about the movie in that moment, right? That you have this character who has this like kind of seething underbelly that is going to come out in one way or the other. And we're going to discover if that's going to be a productive way or in a disastrous way.
Right.
And I do agree. And I think you said it as sort of a negative about the movie, but I'm always rather impressed with first-time filmmakers, indie filmmakers who are interested in making an indie movie, but have very, I guess, classic Hollywood instincts about how they want their movie structured and executed, right? So one of the notes I wrote down was exactly what you were saying, which is that before I watched the movie, I expected it to be, I don't know, a little bit more raw, a little bit more, I'm going to feel like, depressed about this movie. I'm going to feel uncomfortable.
Have you ever seen the movie Chop Shop?
No, I've never seen Chop Shop. No.
Okay. I really like Chop Shop a lot, and I was expecting this to be a lot more like that. This came out about 8 years before that, I think, and that is exactly what you're saying, right? It's very sort of, it's about characters at the sort of very lowest levels of society, just kind of trying to survive. It's real like social realist stuff, and the plot is, barely there. It's kind of a sketch. It's really doesn't sort of follow the Hollywood playbook at all. And I remember when this came out, and I kind of expected this to be very similar to that, tonally and the look of it. And it's not exactly, I will say though, visually it has that very indie sort of, yeah, and shot on film. I mean, it has that like very 90s indie film look, which I love.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Can I just say, can I just say, this is one of the first ones I had, and I wanted to say this before, and you can go, because this is part of what I was going to say, is that the faces thing is incredibly important. And then this movie is shot for $1 million. And because it's shot on film in New York City, in real places, it looks better than 95% of the movies that come out now, you know? And,
absolutely. Yeah. I was sort of getting to that very same point.
But that's, I just wanted to say, because that was part of my point. Just like those things, just, it looks really nice. And I think there's some really, but I also think, to give her credit, and this is part of that, my whole point, is that she's not doing insane rule-breaking compositions and crazy camera stuff. It's a very well-composed, well-shot movie with a perspective, which I was very impressed by for a first-time filmmaker making a movie for, you know, $1 million. So anyway, go right ahead.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was saying. I mean, shooting a couple characters in front of a brick wall on film just looks so much better. And again, I'm not, you know, I don't want to sound like one of those people, right? Like, I teach color correction. I've shot on film before. That's how old I am. But like, you know, it's not something I'm probably ever going to get to do again. And like, digital works great. And there are great looking movies that are made on digital, right? No, I'm not either. But I do kind of miss just the look and the feel of these movies and the grit, right? Like, there is something very sort of precise. And, you know, no matter what you're pointing a digital camera at, no matter what kind of post-production stuff you do with it, like, one of my favorite moments in this film, and it's not a huge scene in the film, but Diana and Hector are just having a conversation, sitting in some busted ass old chairs in this gym in front of a sheetrock wall that's just like all banged up and like beaten in, and there's cracks in it and everything. And I'm just looking at the shot, and it's a great scene sort of in general. And I was like, you know, this feels like something that you can't really do anymore. And 2000 was not that long ago, right?
I mean, it's 25 years ago.
Maybe it was. It doesn't feel like it was that long ago.
Because we're old, but yeah.
Sure. We're not old. We're early middle age. I will defend that to the death, as I've done multiple times on the show already.
You have, yeah.
But like, I don't know. I feel like, especially at that time when I was so into this independent film movement, you know, like I really wanted to see these young sort of hungry filmmakers who went to NYU and made a movie for $1 million. Like, I watched so much stuff like Girl. I don't know how I missed this movie back in the day, by the way. But I mean, this look and this feel was like so prevalent for so long. And I guess we kind of thought it was never going away, but like, it's gone. You know, look at everything Karyn Kusama has done since then. There's nothing that remotely looks or feels like this movie.
Yeah, no, for sure not. And it was really, and I think we're going to probably disagree on some of this, but I watched the movie before I looked up anything about it or anything about her. I just wanted to watch the movie and take it in as a first movie. And I would formulate some guesses in my head about, you know, where the movie came from or where, you know, her ideas came from for it. And, you know, without knowing anything about her, and this being a first movie, I think part of me was like, well, some of this has to be autobiographical, because there are some like extremely specific things that happen in this movie. There's some way the characters talk to one another, or things they say, or sort of how I guess, especially Diana's character is so multifaceted and often does not fall into stereotypes that you expect her character to fall into. Like, at the very beginning, she sort of has that fight with that girl, right? Because she's sort of, you know, she's kind of messing with her friend, but also you can tell she just wants to get into a fight, right? She's got, so you see that first scene, and then when she's talking to the counselor, you expect her to be more aggro, right? You expect her to be more like, I don't need this shit, you know, whatever. And she's not, right? She's very inward. She's very internal. She's intense. And she's a little bit, you know, flippant about her sort of like academic career, but not in a way that is, you know, I don't need this shit, and like throwing things and walking out, where she has to get really like, she has to go to this gym to get her, you know, almost like it's military school, like get her shit together, you know, or whatever.
Yeah, no, she's fairly well adjusted for who she is, right? I mean, she lives in the project. She has a younger brother. Her dad is not the greatest guy. Very sort of traditional masculinity, and we learn a little bit about him later in the film that makes us like him, I think, a lot less. But it's not, as much as this film is a melodrama, it doesn't go to all those places, right? He's not like directly, he's not beating her up, which I kind of thought he was going to be. I kind of thought that's where this was going. I'm kind of glad they didn't go in that direction. And even in that fight in the beginning, right? Like it's about, like you said, she's kind of defending her friend, but also it's just the way she expresses herself. She, much like Ryan Gosling in one of my favorite movies, Only God Forgives, she speaks through violence. She, very, very different movie, but I sort of like that about her. She's an interesting character, and as much as the characters in this movie, and as Kusama said, like they do kind of have their hearts on their sleeve the whole time, she's a little bit of a cipher at times. And I kind of wonder, like when she first says, I want to fight, right? She goes into the gym. There's a good scene early on where her brother's in there. He's getting picked on by this other guy who's kind of a dick. And she puts him in his place. Him in the head. Later on. Yeah. She punches him. And I don't know. She kind of like learns something at that moment, but there's never this, like, it's sort of subtle, right? Like her thought process, like when she goes from that to, oh, I actually want to train to be a boxer. We never really have that scene, we never get the moment where she kind of like talks to someone about it, or like she does have a friend, Marisol, who's kind of her sounding board, and she's fun sort of supporting character, but a little more of a movie person, right? Less of a real person.
Yeah. But that's her role, right? Because you don't get any scenes with like just Marisol. You don't learn anything about Marisol's life,
and we don't need.
We don't need to.
She's good to have around. Yeah. We don't need to spend time with just her. But yeah, it's I kind of liked that we just sort of have to accept that this is what this person would have done. It's where else she gonna go? What else she gonna do? It's something to try, and it's not. She steals some money from her father, which is like her dad. He gives the little brother money. The little brother's kind of an artsy sort of guy. He's what's the character? The actor's name? Sorry, he's on Ash vs. Evil Dead. He's grown up a little bit, but not so much since then. He kind of looks exactly the same. I have it here somewhere.
Ray Santiago.
Yeah, I like him a lot better now. His performance in this movie is not terrific. I think he's trying a little too hard here, but anyway, the little brother is like this certain type of guy, and the dad is supporting him to go to this gym. It's $10 a session, which doesn't sound like much, but adjusted for inflation and considering these characters are from a pretty impoverished background. So she steals from her father and makes this decision, but it's like I never feel like, I got a box or like I'm going to kill myself kind of thing, right? Like it's just, here's a thing that I'm going to try and we'll see what works out. And she doesn't really have a better outlet for herself, and she's not going to participate in, team sports at her school, which we see a little bit of. So it's like, what the hell? Why not? Right. And I like that. Right. It's not, it's not that very movie thing where it's like, this is the only thing that this character can do or wants to do or will do in her life. And I think that's a good choice too.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, the stakes are incredibly personal and small. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think the movie makes, sort of a radical choice in that way, in saying, like you said, that we're not setting this up as, oh, the school ordered her to do an extracurricular or she's going to get kicked out, or, if she...
Yeah, there's no contrivance there at all. It's her decision.
Yeah, if she doesn't win this match, she's not going to get this amount of money and she's going to have to give up this thing or whatever. Those stakes are not there in this, those kind of classic sort of coming of age tale stakes. And I really like that about the way the movie's set up. I like that what I think this movie really is about is sort of taking the radical step to believe in yourself, right? To try to improve yourself, not even to believe yourself, to try to improve yourself in some way. Yeah. And I think she knows she has obviously she knows she's got a problem, like an anger problem, right? And I think she's very clear, right, about she knows why she has an anger problem, right? She knows what her dad did. She knows what happened to her mother. And she knows that, like, she's been holding that in, and she kind of gets, she gets that thing from the counselor or the principal, I guess. And she's like, if you have another fight, you're out. Like, that's the one sort of like, ultimatum she kind of gets, but she doesn't, that never comes back. It's not like she has another fight somewhere and like she has to defend herself and she might get out of school and there's going to be some sort of like dramatic hearing or something. None of that
You're
happens.
writing the Hollywood version of this movie.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
And like you could very much see what the pure sort of mainstream Hollywood version of this is. And I'm so happy it's not that. And I love the fact that like at the end of this movie, and we'll get to it, I really, really like the last couple of scenes here especially. I think this movie really gets better as it goes on. Like I was not on board too much at first, and by the end of it I considered myself a pretty big fan of it. But like this doesn't feel like the origin story of like a terrific boxer who's going to go on and fame and fortune and all that stuff. It feels like this is a thing that this kid tried when she was young and she was good at it and she pursued it for a while and it made her a better person. And like that's it, right? That's the stakes, and that's all we need, and that's all we want. Like this movie doesn't even end with, where is Diana going from here? It ends with kind of a nice little tender scene with her and the romantic interest in this movie, which is nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I like that there was a love story in it. I didn't kind of expect there to be a love story as part of the movie, right? And I like that we bring in this idea of this guy he's a nice guy, right? He is a nice guy, but
he's more likable than she is.
I don't agree at all.
Oh, he's great.
He's not great, but he's not great. He's here's the thing. He's a nice-ish guy, but he's got his own stuff, right? He has a lot of ego wrapped up in this idea that he might have a chance to be like a good fighter, to go pro, right? That's a big part of his like ego wrapped up. He has this ego of like sort of perception where he likes this. He wants to hang out with the pretty girl who comes to see him at the gym because she's pretty, and it gives him like it's like the girl he wants to have on his arm because it like looks right with him, stuff like that.
But he's so kind to Diana throughout this whole movie.
He's very kind. Yeah, he is very kind to her, absolutely. But you can.
I don't see a lot of ego there at all.
I mean, I think this is okay. So there is this idea, right, where that party that Hector has, right, where he knows that Diana's going to be there. They've already had romantic entanglements, right, before this, and he shows up to this party with the other girl, right? Like that's a shitty thing to do.
It is. Well, yeah.
That's a shitty thing to do.
How much awareness? I'm not sure if I agree entirely about the awareness, but yeah, but the look that he gives her in that scene is really, I don't know. I'm not saying I love this character. Like the character that I think is the most lovable, sympathetic, again, is Hector. He's amazing. But, and the rest are flawed in ways that are interesting. But yeah, I like that this movie kind of is a romance, and the conceit, I did not know this at all. And I'm so glad I didn't, right? The big fight in this movie, it's like an amateur championship, and whoever wins this kind of goes on to bigger and better things. And it ends up being Diana and oh man, I'm blanking on his name already. Adrian. Adrian, right. Because the first time we meet him in the gym, somebody's like, yo, Adrian. And I was like, okay, a little bit of an obvious nod there, but fine. You're in this genre. We know everyone who's watching this movie has already seen Rocky, so whatever. But the idea that she has to fight, basically this guy that she's in love with, and he doesn't, neither one of them really wants to, especially him, right? He's like, well, I'll eat too much and I won't make weight, so I won't have to do it. And, it's like a respect thing with her. She wants him to give her everything that he has, and she's going to fight him as hard as she can. And like the idea that these two like star-crossed young lovers have to fight each other at the end of this movie, and then have to sort of resolve their relationship after that, which is what the last scene is about. That's brilliant. Like that's one of the best choices in the movie. And I've never seen that before, right? Like I love this genre that is so rote and so by the numbers. And yet this thing, it's like, okay, that's a new one. That's a wrinkle here.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're skipping around a little bit. I'm going to just take us back a little bit so we're not going to go scene by scene. It's a pretty simple movie. Like it's not a movie that, has a complicated snaking plot that we really have to, go through. But it starts with this fight, this opening shot. And Karyn Kusama said, initially, the opening was much more complicated than it ended up being. It was like there was sort of like a boxing sort of fight going on, like a sort of like in her head kind of thing that you were seeing as the camera was pushing in, and there was all of the bringing more of the subtext into text and everything like that. And she said that when they got into like the editing room, it was like this. it's just too much. Like we're trying to do too much. So that's why it just kind of starts with this one shot of Michelle Rodriguez's character Diana. And then we get into this sort of fight scene in school, which we talked about this part already. She gets kind of this little thing from the principal who's like, you can't do this anymore. And then we're sort of shepherded back into her home life. And this is where we meet her dad. And what did you think of the dad's performance?
I thought he was good. I liked Paul Calderon. He's been in like thousands of things. Another sort of like seasoned character actor. Maybe not so much at the time. Like maybe he did a lot of stuff after this, but had a pretty good career before this. I thought he was good. I mean, I like that the family stuff, as I said, it's not too over the top. I mean, she does beat him up later on in the movie. She chokes him out. Yeah, it's a pretty good scene. But no, I thought there was some kind of nice stuff between the two of them, and he plays it pretty subtly. And Michelle Rodriguez too. Like she is understated when she needs to be understated, and even though the character kind of gets explosive and fiery at times, it's never like unbelievable. And you mentioned that before, right? Like there's a nice sort of groundedness of the character. So even when the movie does kind of sitcom-y, tropey sort of stuff with the characters or with the plot, it's easier to swallow that way, I think.
I think you need a better term than sitcom-y for this stuff, because it's not like there are bits and jokes going on.
Soap opera.
Yeah, soap opera is probably more.
I'm looking at like low rent TV. So yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. This is that would not be a funny sitcom.
Yeah, no. So
the Guzmans.
Yeah,
tonight on the Guzmans.
Yeah. What I really like about
Dad's drunk again.
Yeah. What I really like about his performance is, I think all the stuff we come to learn later about him, his actual violence in his life and everything like that, I think he does a good job of bringing that to this early part of the performance as sort of an undercurrent, underbelly to his sort of top level, what he's giving out. Because even in these opening scenes, I'm like, I feel like he's coding as someone who is abusive to me. The way that they're sort of reacting to him and the way that he's sort of acting, but it wasn't fully there, right? It was like Michelle Rodriguez isn't scared to talk to him say things to certain him, but there is this feeling of tenseness when those things come up. That's like, it feels like something was there. And I think that's a compliment to the performances and also to the direction, where you've got this sort of hanging tension that's happening and you don't really know why, but you can guess as to why, right? Even without them explicitly saying anything during those times.
I think so. And he plays that nicely too, because again, it's like father, like daughter, right? Like he's repressing some things, right? He has a violent side that he has used in ways that, that are not productive. As you were saying before, there are two directions, two paths you can take with that, right? And she ends up taking the good one. But yeah, I like the scenes between the two of them because there's that little bit of tension there, but she doesn't hate him, right? It's not just like she doesn't avoid him. They sit down. There's a lot of scenes where they're just sitting around their tiny little table in the kitchen having dinner together, and they're tense, but they're not like, you're not on the edge of your seat like, oh, something terrible is going to happen here. Somebody's throwing a plate at the wall or something. There's just sort of this, he's a little bit condescending and he's kind of a jerk and a misogynist, and he's not a great dad to his son or little brother either, but like, it's not like, it feels believable, and it does, it feels like he's kind of holding something back, just like Diana's kind of holding something back when she's not in the ring where she gets to actually express it. So yeah, I think he's very good in this. I like him a lot.
And what I like about the script, talking about those times where it's melodramatic and then hangs back, there isn't also the scene where he's like, I don't know how to be a girl dad, I don't know how to handle, like, there's no scene like that, right? There's no scene where he sort of breaks down and gives that kind of dialogue. And I really appreciate that about the scripting and the performance, where you can feel that at times, right? Where he doesn't quite know how to be a parent to either of these kids, right? He's having his son do this thing, which his son doesn't want to do, and he feels like it's a waste of time and it's not really helping him, and his daughter who wants to do it, he's also not doing that. He's not giving her what she needs either. And he really has no idea what she needs, right? He kind of says the thing where he can't, that kind of creepy thing where he's like, can't you wear a skirt every once in a while or whatever to her, which is the only time where it starts to sort of fluctuate into that place. But she kind of puts him in his place, right? Where she's like, you kind of have no right to talk to me about any of this stuff.
Yeah, and I don't feel there's. I mean, it's a creepy line, but I don't find him a creepy character in that way, right? He's just very sort of set in his ways. He's very traditional, and like, men are a certain way and women are a certain. It's machismo, and women don't get to have machismo.
Yeah. I mean, he has the wrong daughter because she has a lot of machismo.
Oh yeah.
And so,
well, it just shows how little he understands her. But I actually do believe, so there's a scene, and again, we're skipping ahead. I'm sorry about that. But she comes home with a black eye, and she knows that she's been seeing Adrian, and it's like, so you're just gonna run around with this guy who's like beating you up, and like that's not, obviously she got that black eye from legitimate, for legitimate reasons in the boxing ring, which is exactly what he wants his other kid to do. But like in that moment, I do kind of believe that he cares about her. He doesn't want her to get beaten up, and she kind of throws it right back in his face, like, you did this to my mother, basically, so how dare you. Even if that was what it was, you have no right to say that. But like, I don't think that's coming from a place where, and again, I don't want to over psychoanalyze these characters, but I don't know, I don't like the dad in this movie, but I also don't completely hate him. And he's not just like, like, I don't think the thesis of this movie is that, all guys are evil and all dads are horrible. They're just fucking up their kids left and right. And, I do think Hector kind of fulfills the fatherly role for her, especially later in the movie, which is really nice, because we learn about his kids. And that's a great scene, too, because it's very subtle and it's mentioned once. And, those are kids. He doesn't see them much anymore, and that's it. So he's got some sort of regrets about his past and is trying to atone for things with Diana. And it all works pretty well, I think. And I like the, like there's I sent you a couple of clips from, I believe it's the Dallas Observer, the critic. It's like the one standout bad review of this movie that just kind of talked about it as if it's just the most man-hating thing ever made. And, Kusama has talked about wanting to be a distinctly feminist filmmaker and speak to female issues and the female mindset and things like that. And I think she does that, and she will get into her other films where she does that in other ways. But like, I don't know, I didn't feel like this movie was anti-men in any way. There's some sort of nice male characters in this movie, and I think they add to the story rather than, they're more than just sort of comic book villains, which is really nice.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, right, that as we talk about her, we're probably going to come up, like you said, a few times. I think very clearly, and I think we should not even qualify this after this, because I don't think that it needs to be qualified. But to be a feminist does not mean you hate men, right?
But in this review, that certainly was kind of what was coming across. And like, I didn't see it. Like, I think I read that actually before I watched the movie, just because I was like, why did this person hate? I remember this being a fairly well-reviewed movie, and yeah, it's, like 77 on Metacritic. So like, it's well liked mostly. And even the other bad reviews, you see that, they're talking about things like the plot, and this person just very sort of virulently like had some real hatred for this movie and actually praised a lot of things about it, but hated that aspect of it so much, which I didn't see at all, that, he gave it this overall very bad review, and was talking about how good the performances and the cinematography and stuff were. And I don't know, that guy must have been having a bad day or something when he saw in September of 2000 or January of 2000 when he saw Girlfight. But
what I'll say was, I really like about Paul Colon's performance, and also the scripting of his character, is I don't think you're meant to hate him, right? I think what the movie is presenting is, this is a guy who has a lot of problems, right? And a lot of shortcomings, and has done obviously some heinous stuff in his life, who is trying to be better about who he is. He's not fully succeeding, but obviously he's doing well enough where his kids remain, sort of comfortable with him. And, you can definitely feel there's some affection, right? It's not a completely loveless place, even though it's not like the best environment, right, to live in. And I appreciate that about
and that. I love that it's resolved. The tension between Diana and her father is resolved in the sense that she chokes him out in the kitchen and basically asserts her power. I could kill you right now. It's maybe the most over the top moment in the movie. And then we see the empty seat at the arena at the end of the movie, and the brother is saving, and he's like, you could just take the seat. He's not showing up. And I think, the implication there, very obviously is that it's her father that he's thinking, maybe could show up to this, but we don't get that scene, right? Like he never shows up. So, that's the resolution is she kind of puts him in his place and that's it. And then it's over. And like, I like that this, like you could do, the Lord of the Rings, half dozen different endings, resolve all of these plot lines. Cause there are a few things going on that, we never see Hector's kids. They don't show up to the fight at the end. Like,
No.
hey dad, good job training this girl.
Cause it's not about that, right? The stakes are so tiny. And even above, like, the brother's like, no, he's not coming. We never get the shot of her like looking at the empty chair.
We never see the brother again
in
like,
the crowd.
Once he says, "Oh, take the seat," that's it. Like we're with her for the rest of the movie, and oh man, I really the last two scenes of this movie are fantastic.
And speaking of I feel like this is a good way to talk about the movie. Actually, we're following sort of like these character arcs, and I think that's a good way to talk about the movie. That scene, I feel like the scene where she chokes out her dad is really, I think, one of the keys to the movie in a lot of ways, because I feel like in that moment, you kind of see why she started down this journey in the first place, right? Where there was something in her that was like, yeah, he doesn't do this anymore, but he still could, right? And I'm still at the mercy of this man who did this thing to my mother, which led to her death, right? And I refuse to be this person, right? I'm not going to be this person. And in that moment, she goes like, look, you don't have this power over me. Like, even if somewhere in your head, you still think you've got it and you don't have it, right? This is like, I am not my mom. I am somebody different. I'm also not you, right? Like I am somebody else. And she doesn't say those things, but I think all that's communicated in the physicality and moments of that performance. From the moment you learn sort of, why her mom, what happened to her mom and why it happened to her mom, I feel like it kind of unlocks this moment in a really affecting way. And I think that, I think she's great in that scene. I think he's great in that scene. And I think they both communicate that stuff without having to really say it explicitly. And that was one of the scenes that really kind of sung for me in the movie, because it is very heightened. It is very melodramatic, but I felt like it was earned because of all the stuff we had seen around it, and I thought it was really effective. Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of wraps up the dad's storyline, right? We talked about the brother as well. The brother doesn't really have as much of a story. He's kind of just there, as a counterpoint to her. He's so opposite her, right? He's a complete opposite person of her. That's really his role here, is to be quiet and reserved and nonviolent, and to show sort of the
sort of cheerful in a way that she never is. Like, he's kind of a fun guy. And I mean, there's a nice little character moment though, where basically he gives her the money that the dad is giving to him to go train at the gym. Like, she needs that money. It's like, just take it. I don't really want it anyway. It's like, well, what are you going to do? He says, I'm a geek. I'll do something constructive or something like that, which I like. Like, we see him drawing. He wants to go to art school. And of course the dad is, that's not a thing that a man does. Is, what are you going to do? Paint houses on Long Island or something? He's like, yeah, maybe I will. which was a nice little moment. I also love, when Diana's getting into it with the dad, and he comes into the room, and she's like, go to your room, like the way a parent would say that. And, he kind of calls her out on it, but yeah, you can see that she does have that sort of, protective side when it comes to him as well, which is nice. I also liked, I didn't get it. I think I might have just, my hearing sucks. I was at too many concerts, too close to the speakers as a young person. So I have the hearing of someone much older than me, because I'm early middle age.
Right. Yeah. You're not old. Before. Not old.
Right.
Definitely something that old young people say is, when I was younger and my hearing is going, are definitely two things that a young virile person says.
Exactly. Yeah. So very young and virile. The young fighters in this movie.
Yeah, you're ready to get in that ring and fight. You're ready to get in there. Yeah.
Yeah, the over 40 league.
Jump all that rope.
That's the inspirational boxing movement. Well, didn't they do that? Anyway.
Yes, they did. It's called every Rocky movie after 3.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Basically.
Didn't Stallone, who did he fight? Now we're getting way off track.
What, in Rocky Balboa?
No. Wasn't there a boxing movie with Stallone and somebody else?
Oh, yes. Oh, God.
Right around his age. And
I can't remember.
Was it De Niro?
Was it De Niro?
Oh man, is that a movie that exists?
It is definitely a movie that exists.
Look that up. Anyway, all I was saying
Grudge Match.
Grudge Match.
It's him and De Niro. Yes.
Have you seen it?
No, of course I haven't seen it.
I mean, it's probably not as good as Girlfight. When she goes to the gym the
by
first
Peter
time,
Siegel, so there's no way that it's
okay. The dad gives her money. I thought there was like a criminal thing going on there, right? Like I thought the dad was kind of involved in something shady, and she was just like running something for him. You know, there was like a little bit of a low stakes sort of criminal enterprise happening, and that actually doesn't happen in this movie, and that's nice too. Like that's too much. That's too movie, and I like that it didn't go that way. But like the first time she went there, I thought there was like, you know, a little under the table exchanging cash kind of thing. And I like that it never really went in that direction. And, you know, the guys at the gym are just old boxers who can't do it themselves anymore. So let's train the next generation. I don't know who the actor is. The faces in this movie, as you said, like all of the trainers, there's this old man, this like chubby old man who is training some of the other fighters and kind of gets into it with Hector. They have this like cute little back and forth. They've clearly been working together for years and years and years. And he's fantastic. And then there's this old guy, Ira, who looks like he's like 200 years old.
Yeah, I loved Ira.
Yeah, I love that he's hardly in the movie. He gets like maybe 2 minutes of screen time, but like that just like they all look like real people. Like there's nobody, not that anyone in this movie is unattractive, but they all look like real people. Nobody looks like, you know, I always talk about this, right? Like there's Hollywood good looking and then there's just regular good looking. And most of the people in this movie are regular good looking. And I'm sure, especially when they were younger, you know, like Jamie Torelli, like good looking guy. But like in this movie, he just looks like a person that you would see walking down the street. Looks like somebody who you would see in a setting like this. They don't dress amazing. Like the costumes in this are great because they're like stuff that's just clearly bought at like, you know, cheap, like sporting goods stores, stuff like that, and worn in. Like I really, I don't know. I enjoy that kind of just realism or the attempt at looking like realism. And yeah, it's just these like really wonderful looking character actors, just wrinkly and beardy and just disheveled. I like that a lot.
So this guy, the guy who played Ira, his name is Thomas Barbour. He was born in 1921. He left us in 2005. He was in The Taking of Pelham 123. He was in Arthur. He was in The Age of Innocence.
He was born in the Age of Innocence.
Yeah. But one of these guys, right, where he did some acting when he was like in the 60s, but really didn't start doing stuff until the mid 70s. So he was, you know, one of those guys who started doing when he was like in his 50s, basically. When he's really
and it has one of those like distinctive looking old man faces that like for a movie like this, you need that guy. And it, again, we see so little of him, but like he announces the fight at the end of the movie, or I think the one in the middle of the movie, actually, where he's just, you know, there's like not even 24 people sitting there. There's like 4 people sitting there watching this fight. And I don't know. He's got this great, like, I believe him. Like, I don't know. I feel like I'd seen his face before. I'd seen the actor before, but if he was just some guy that was actually doing this, you know, they just pulled a non-professional boxing guy to be in this movie, I would believe it because he gets that across.
That's the vibe. It has like that Scorsese vibe, right? Where it's like these guys could just be guys off the street that they brought in to act around the other guys because they're just so, you know, so authentic. That's some of what it felt like 100%. And I was just say too, John Sayles is in the movie. He's the science teacher in the movie.
I love that. Yep.
And he's got a couple of things, you know, he kind of almost narrates a couple of the early sort of like training sequences because she's like in class and he's talking about like the rules of thermodynamics and stuff like that. And then you're seeing the sort of these like boxing montages. And I liked that. I thought like, oh, this is like an interesting way to like tie these two things together in a way that, you know, she could have just like left out. He's got a great voice and, you know, it just works, you know, very well. And then, you know, the other major plot line, right, other than the fighting plot line, which we'll talk about last, I think, with Hector and the build-up thing, is when we talk about the love story with Adrian. And, you know, I like how it develops, right? How it kind of starts with her kind of being like, this guy's kind of a jerk, you know, like, because first time we see him is he's kind of joking around with the guy who was being a dick to her brother when they first get there, right? And he's like kind of like giving him shit for getting hit by a girl and all this kind of stuff. And then, she's kind of like seeing him at the gym while she's training. And
yeah, he's the hot shot in this very sort of low rent gym, but like he's the guy there, right? Like he is the one that maybe does have a chance to go, because like, I'm not an expert on boxing. I've watched a lot of boxing, but I wouldn't consider myself, anyone who could watch a movie like this and be like, oh, that's unrealistic or something like that. But you can kind of tell that he's the only one that has like form that's halfway decent, like some of the other ones, like just the even the body type, like some very, very skinny dudes in the ring in this movie that look like, I could probably beat the crap out of them. I have no boxing skills whatsoever. I'm just, I'm short, but I'm bigger than them. So it's kind of fun to see that, but like he is the one that actually looks like a real fighter.
Yeah. Good looking guy too. Like they do a really good job. I think, I think he's the type of guy who, again, good looking guy, but not like looks like a movie star good looking guy. Looks like the good looking guy that you would see in real life, in like the best looking guy of this set of guys that is like,
oh yeah, for sure.
Like that kind of thing. I like how their kind of thing starts very small, just like, okay, I'm gonna drive you home because it's really late, and like, this is a shitty neighborhood, and I like their whole discussion. I'm a big sucker for little indie movie that has people driving in cars or taking public transit, where it's like people talking in a car mixed with shots of the city or town or whatever that they're in. It's just very romantic to me. Especially the train stuff.
This movie has a terrific sense of place too.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, this is a New York movie.
Yeah, talking about these very specific neighborhoods. Park Gowanus, Red Hook, just like talking about this stuff. That I feel like she's very. And I was surprised too. She didn't grow up in New York. Obviously, she went to school in New York. But this feels like it was birthed by somebody who really knows the city inside and out, which was I think a really good detail. And there's this little moment when they're driving home, where he says to her, they're in the middle of a conversation, and he kind of stops and he goes, "You got to tell me where to turn," or whatever. And I'm like, I just love shit like that in movies like this, because in movies in general, because it's such a little tiny detail that's very real and true, right? About when you're driving somebody home and you don't know exactly where you're going. But most of the time in a movie, they just skip over that thing, right? It's just like,
yeah. Well, even just the detail, she lives on the 11th floor of the housing project that she's in. They have a little conversation about that, like, why that's better than or worse than other floors. And I like specific, like that was a thing going back to the Kaczynski movies, right? Like there were, Oblivion, and there were some movies in there where it's just like you didn't get that stuff. And it sort of hurts, right? Like these are just characters. They don't feel like real people. Like these lives do not feel lived in. And this movie, I think, is the opposite of that. So, and again, as I've said a couple of times, I think that helps sell just some of the more movie stuff, the more, this is a template, this is a formula that we're following. And, some of the blocking and stuff like that, it's just, as I said, it feels a little bit first movie-ish. Some of the dialogue feels like I'm going to say this line, and then I'm going to react by saying this line. There's not a lot of naturalism in that. And I was, I guess, sort of expecting this to have more of that. But then you do have these nice little moments about like the conversation about the 11th floor. You got to tell me where to turn, as you were saying, stuff like that I think really nicely works against it. And by the end of this, it's almost completely resolved, right? Like, as I said, this movie kind of gets better as it goes on and just feels a little bit more sure-footed. And by the time we get to, and actually we haven't talked yet about the in-ring, the training montages, and then the fight scenes in this, which I think are really, really nicely done, especially for something on this low of a budget. I mean, we've seen it done so many different ways, and there is this long tradition of boxing movies, from the inspirational stuff, the Rockies, to the more introspective, your Raging Bulls, and those types of movies. And they all kind of have their own approach to like the stuff that's going on in the ring. And I really, really like the way this movie does it, because we get these, it's not exactly, there's a lot of handheld camera in this, but it's not that like documentary style handheld camera where, they are nice compositions, and we're not sort of moving the camera all over the place, and the handheldness of it doesn't sort of, it's not calling attention to itself. But then by the time we get to the last few fight scenes in this movie, we're seeing when she fights the female opponent, it's about 2/3 of the way through, we get these in-ring, these like POV shots where this girl is like taking swings at the camera, and it's this wonderful little practical effect. There's just one frame of white, right? Like when the punch connects, like when Diana or the other girl gets hit, we get this one frame of white, and it's a very simple thing to do. But, you know, at the time, probably a lot harder to do. Now, digitally, that's like, I could show somebody how to do that in probably under 30 seconds and make it look just as good as this. But it's really sort of nice in this movie. It works very well. It's a great device. And by the time we get to the final fight scene where Adrian and Diana have to square off against each other, it's really, really nice there. Like, I think that's just a nicely choreographed, really well done fight. We get so much, like, there's a lot of characterization that happens in the fight, particularly in that scene, but throughout the movie. I think Rodriguez, like, for a non-professional actress at this point, right? For someone who's never acted before, she's acting in those fight scenes, right? Like, she is this character. This is not Michelle Rodriguez, like with somebody throwing punches at her. This is Diana Guzman. You know, we see kind of what she's feeling and the progression of her ideas and her plan and what else is sort of going on behind the scenes in her head in these scenes. Like, they are very, very well done for what it is, but not showy, right? Like, it's not one of those movies. There's not a lot of slow-mo here. There's a little bit, you know, here and there, but it's not overdone. We don't get like any, you know, I love Raging Bull. It's one of my favorite movies, but, you know, there's a stylization to the fight scenes in that movie, you know, the blood and spit sort of splattering all over everything. We never get that. I don't think anyone ever really draws too much blood. There's one moment where Hector wipes a little bit off of Diana's face and she gets a couple of black eyes, but this is not about sort of the ooky side of boxing, which I think actually works for this movie because, you know, they are amateurs. They're kind of at the very bottom of this sport, so they're not hitting quite, and they're not heavyweights either. Obviously, you know, she's like 122 pounds, I think they say a couple of times. So that's not someone who's going to be drawing a lot of blood and making huge gashes on people. I don't know. Again, not a boxing expert, but I assume getting hit by somebody that size is somewhat preferable to being hit by a Tyson Holyfield type person.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Boy, that makes me sound old, right? Like,
yeah, definitely.
Who's that?
I don't know. Anybody talking about any boxing at this point, it feels old. Probably. I don't think anybody watches boxing anymore.
True.
What I enjoyed, similarly, we think about the matches, was that it wasn't this overly movieized version of a boxing match, right? It wasn't. And I don't say this as someone who dislikes these movies, like Rocky. I love Rocky, right? But, you know, in Rocky, it's not really about the realism of the boxing. It's just like people getting the shit beat out of them for, you know, for this whole match.
Yeah.
And everything being really has dramatic and forceful feeling as it possibly can be feeling, right? And in this, she kind of has the confidence to have some of the fight not have a lot of air in it, right? Where it's like, they're hopping around a little bit. They're trying to hit, but they're not really.
Yeah, they're sticking, moving. There's great shots of just the character's feet, right? Like, you don't see, they talk a little bit about footwork in this movie, and that's not the most exciting thing, right? Like, you're watching a boxing movie, you want to see punches, but really, footwork is really important. And I like, there's a little bit of discussion of strategy and stuff like that, and Hector kind of gets this thing across, like, you know, this is when he's going to sort of open up. You can get around and punch from different angles, like, because she is smaller and a little bit more agile than like a big muscle-bound dude. This movie, I think, kind of captures that really nicely as well. And the training montages, sorry, I'm pronouncing that word wrong tonight. I know better than that. Like, I think they're very, very good. The score in this is fantastic. It's got this kind of flamenco thing going on, and like the intensity of the music, I think, works really nicely for those. And, you know, it's stuff that we don't always see. And this is not, again, I really like Rocky too, but nobody's beating up a slab of meat here, right? You know, it's the speed bag, and it's the, you know, she's sort of watching herself in the mirror, and there's this great, I don't know why they're in this place, but there's this wonderful, wonderful shot. It's just this gorgeous urban cinematography. Her and Hector are under a bridge. They're under an overpass, and they're like sparring under there, which, why wouldn't you just do it in the gym? They're like on the walk home or something. It's like, oh, here, let me show you a couple things and we'll have a street fight here, essentially. But it just looks so good. And I really, you know, we've seen so many training montages, and I feel like the ones in this movie, I was glued to the screen for them, which is, again, that's testament to the director, right? Like, there's many, many ways to make those boring because we've seen them so many times before.
Yeah. And I think, what you're saying, this sort of Hector at the beginning, he's kind of teaching her, right? Like she says like, well, yeah, but the power was good. And he goes, what power doesn't matter. Like, it's not about the power, right? That's not what it's about. It's like, you're going to, and the movie, I think, kind of follows that mold of what Hector is teaching in the boxing area through like everything in the movie, right? This is not about how hard you can sock somebody in the face, right?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Nobody gets knocked out in this movie.
No, which I also really liked.
A couple of them
like,
go down and they get up before the count is over. But I love that too, right? Like
they're all technical decisions. They're all
split decisions, which is nice because a lot of boxing is that. And like movies, they play up this sport where it's like it's all about the knockout because what is more dramatic than a knockout, right?
Right,
and
exactly.
The count goes down and like that person doesn't get up. And again, we need to in detail talk about those last two scenes, but I like the fact that this movie kind of like it sidesteps that a little bit. It does much like Diana herself. It's a little lighter on its feet than the usual boxing movie.
Yeah. And really before we totally get off of it, because we're gonna get to those last two scenes in a moment, is during the love story portions. One of the things I really like too is that scene where they're kind of like hanging out on the basketball court or whatever it is, and like they're kind of like sitting, they're kind of standing or sitting like right with a pole, like right between them. And the way she sort of like holding on to it and like looking at him, I really just thought like there's so much tenderness there in her performance, which I really liked. And yeah, so I just want to say that. So going back to the training stuff. Yeah, I thought that stuff was really good. Again, we talked about the stakes. I really like that a lot. I like that Hector, again, there's no scene where Hector's like, damn it, she's a girl, but I think she's great. Like he kind of started, he's like, you can't fight. And then she's like, but why not? And he's like, because you just can't. Like, it's just not a thing that we do. Like, he's not even saying like, I don't think it's right. He's just saying like, look, we don't have there's other girls here. Like who are you going to fight? I'm not going to have you fight the guys. Like, it's just not going to happen. And there's no big scene where she's like, I can fight the guys. I'm good enough to fight the guys. Stop not believing in me. He just sees her progressing and is like, you know what? She can do this. Like, I didn't think that she'd be able to do this, but she can do this.
Yeah. Well, there's like a rival trainer. I'm not sure if he even gets a name in the movie, but he's just adamantly like, no, like this cannot happen.
He is
like
that guy. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. He's absolutely that. And he actually says it like girls, like, oh, it's actually, the line is pretty good, right? He says something about like girls can't fight and most boys can't fight either, right? Like it's a very rarefied group of people that can participate in this sport. I really liked is kind of a little bit of a twist or a reversal in the movie where she's the only one for like the first half of this movie, right? She's the only female in that environment, right? So we know she's going to be fighting guys, and then like it's almost a surprise, like, oh wait, there actually are other female fighters at other gyms, and now you're going to fight her. So she goes up against that first girl, and that's a great sort of fight scene that we were just talking about. But like, I don't know, like the integration of the sport becomes like a sort of side thread that's going on as Diana's progressing and getting better and better. And even though the climactic fight in this movie is between her and a guy, Adrian, I sort of like that idea that she's not the only one. Like if she was that special, if she was like 1 in a million or 1 in a billion, whatever, it just wouldn't be as believable as, there's other girls sort of like her, not as good as her. She's got something, she's got a little spark that they don't have. Because that first girl she fights, right, is known, they kind of play her up as this like more technical sort of fighter. And we see that in that scene. Again, great characterization. Like the fights have personality in this, and the character like that character never has even a line. But yet we sort of see what kind of fighter she is and why Diana's better than her. And that's tough to articulate in a movie, like to make that read, especially for someone who is not, an expert in boxing, I think is good. Yeah,
absolutely. And the way that Hector develops as it goes on, it's just like such a soulful performance.
Oh, he's fantastic. Yeah.
He communicates all that fatherly stuff, which all just with emotion and performance, and not by, again, spelling it out in dialogue or over explaining how he's feeling. And the little line from his wife, he doesn't see his kids a lot. Like you said, he tells you so much about him. He talks about where he came from and how he came over here, the way he was boxing. And I love that he's talking about his boxing career And she goes, well, what happened? And she goes, what happens to basically everybody? I lost.
Yeah.
And then it was over. Basically, you know, like that's what happens. You know, like all these guys, like that's what's going to happen to basically all of them, you know? And I like that, you know, we get this idea that Adrian is the best of these people and that his trainer, you know, his misogynistic trainer is very much like, this guy's gonna go pro, you know, or whatever. And, you know, I think that that's obviously just not true, right? It's just not true about him, you know, because Diana's been training for probably a couple of months.
Yeah.
And she beats him pretty handily, you know? So it's like, there is like, I like that the movie is also about, you know, this sort of like,
well, the reality of the sport,
the reality,
right?
the reality and the delusion that comes along with it too.
That misogynistic trainer is right in some sense that very few people are successful in this sport. So how can, if it's hard enough for a guy to do this, how is a girl ever going to be able to do it? Like there is that idea, right? Like, and that's true of most sports, right? But especially this one, because you take a few good hits in the wrong way and you could, you know, be paralyzed or something. Like there's a danger about it also. It's not like you're playing professional golf or something. Well, another sport that I like a lot, and I love golf movies as well. But I sort of like, I mean, there is
really playing up your youth, Nick.
I started playing golf when I was 14.
No,
all right, whatever.
I'm just saying.
But yeah, I mean, again, we talked about this before, right? But like no one in this movie is going to be like the world champion or go to the Olympics or anything like that. It's a thing that they're going to do in their life. You know, and will hopefully lead them to better. That well, like Adrian actually says it at one point, right? Which is a nice line as well. He's like, I thought it was going to be my ticket. I thought, right? And he's sort of, even at the age that he's at, and even though he gets beat at the end of this, he does still have a chance at continuing and maybe going pro. He kind of knows already that that's most likely not going to happen. That's not going to be the life he's going to lead. He's probably going to end up like his father, and his father has a respectable business and, you know, runs like a body shop or something like that. And he's jockeying cars back and forth there for his dad, and he kind of knows that's where he's headed. And Diana, like, where is she really gonna go? But, you know, still, is it worth doing? And I think the movie argues it. Yeah, it is. Like you discover something about yourself in this. But I love that, as we've been talking about, the low stakes, sort of low rent idea of all of this, you know, and even like the fact that the final fight in this movie is, you know, like it's a place where people are like sitting around in folding chairs eating Fritos. Like that's pretty cool.
And it's not like this big thing where like, you know, she wins and like, you know, the crowd erupts, or even like,
no.
Or even you cut to her brother and her brother's like freaking out, or even like Hector in that moment is like, yeah, like this is the greatest thing that's ever happened in my life.
He has one great moment at the end of that fight. Yeah, that just sort of expression of pure joy. And again, a lot of it is the actor too, when she wins by decision, unanimous decision, that one. The one with the other girl's a split decision.
Yeah.
But we then cut immediately to this shot of Diana in the locker room.
Oh my God, this shot.
In the mirror. It's fantastic. And it's a long take. I love long takes. I don't know if we've talked about that much on this show before.
A lot of long takes in this movie.
I enjoy long takes very, very much. And this is a great one. No dialogue, no other actor. It's Michelle Rodriguez. It's after the fight. And she should be like beside herself. She should be over the moon with joy. And she's like not feeling that great about it, you know? It's not that triumphant, you know, Sylvester Stallone and Talia Shire just embracing at the end of Rocky, that sort of glorious moment. Again, great movie as well. But I love the way this movie ends up. And she does, I like the fact that she had to do this at the expense of Adrian's career, and that sort of sinks in for her. Like there's so much emotional gravitas to that scene, and it should be this triumphant thing, and it's not. And that's such a left field choice for a movie like this, right? Like that should be the part where you're feeling the best about these characters, and, you know, it's an inspirational sports movie. They're feel-good movies, and we don't really feel that good, and the character doesn't feel that good, and I love that. That's when I like that. I think it took until that's 2 minutes from the end of the movie. There's one more scene after that, but that's when I was like, okay, Girlfight is next level stuff. Like it was a good movie. That's when it went great movie for me.
And that's just, and this is why I say about Michelle Rodriguez in this movie is just one of these performances that you can absolutely tell why right after this, Hollywood's like, you're going to be in all the big movies now because like, and then we won't, in a couple of years, we won't do with you anymore. And it's going to be weird, but like right away we're getting you in because this scene is one of those scenes. And, I did a lot of I wanted to be an actor when I was a kid and obviously never good enough to be one, but watching scenes like this is just, like you said, she's playing like 5 different emotions at once. And she has to play, I'm thrilled that I won, right? Also pride in herself for, like I said, this radical act of wanting to improve yourself and doing it and realizing that the reward at the end is not adulation. It's not a room full of people hugging you. It's just you knowing that
it's not even money. Like they never talk about like what is even the purse for this fight? Is there no? It's an amateur fight, right?
It's
like,
an amateur fight. Yeah,
I don't think she gets anything for this. Yeah,
it's just that you work your ass off and you achieve the thing that you wanted to achieve, and it's really for you. But also, in order to get there, you had to maybe damage or hurt somebody that you loved, and that's difficult.
And she really has nobody to share it with.
No way to share it with, but also you're talking about the feminist angle of the movie and everything like that. It's also this idea of like if he had fought another guy, like his best friend or whatever, that they had to fight, it would have been like this, like, macho, like, well, like you beat me, but I respect you. Yeah. And, but she doesn't even get that, right? She's alone in this room and she's laughing and then crying. And then, it's just she's so good in this moment. And, it's also a very much a scene about this coming of age thing where it's like, this is what being an adult is, right? There's no one, something is not one thing anymore, right? It's not just a good thing. Like it's a good thing. It's also a bittersweet thing. It's also a bad thing. Everything's crammed into this one thing in one moment and she's dealing with all those emotions, right? But I think also realizing that, and there's some lines in the movie when she's talking to Marisol, like on the bleachers or whatever about, sort of tossed off about how like, school seems to be going okay now and she's not really like too concerned about it anymore. So like she's also like got her life kind of figured out, she's kind of stood up to her dad. It's just this release of all of these emotions, of all of this built up anger and stress and anxiety just like flying out of her at one time. And it's so well done. And it's, again, great performance. Also, really brave direction to just be one long shot. Like you're not cutting to coverage. You're not, changing angles, nothing like that. You're not trying to force dialogue or have Hector come in and be like, why are you upset? Like, this should be your moment or whatever. But what about Adrian? None of that stuff is there. It's just allowed to play. And I really like that a lot. One of the long shots we didn't talk about either was earlier when she's like practicing in the mirror and the shot starts like right, just close up on her face. And you don't even realize it's a mirror shot. She's like in her bedroom. Yes. And it slowly pulls out and she's like, she's doing her fighting really and it just pulls out and she's in the mirror and she's doing all this stuff. And it's like, this shot's forever long. Like it's so long and it's so sustained. And it's got that nice trick of it. Like it was a mirror. You didn't even realize it was a mirror. So you get that sort of weird, like feeling of the world not being quite right. Just really good, solid filmmaking in those moments. 100%. So yeah, she beats him. We get one scene in between, interstitial scene where she goes and like kind of watches him while he's working, right? At his thing, at his dad's shop. Yeah. And then she kind of walk away and she goes back to the gym and she goes into her, like, we didn't say this thing. They kind of, Herb is like, well, we're not one of these newfangled fancy gyms. We don't really have anything for the ladies, but you can have this closet or whatever.
We don't use it for much. But there's a great moment in this scene too. Yeah, I forgot about this moment also, where it looks like she's going to live there. Like she's kind of given up on her home life in some sense.
Yeah, maybe. But what I really take from this scene, right, is that she's been so singularly focused, right, on just this, right, on just...
She's never done anything with it, but yeah, there's
I'm gonna be a boxer. I want to prove people I can do this. And now she's actually looking at this place and being like, there's more, right? There's more to my life than just this one singular focus. So she actually cleans out this room. I don't know if she's gonna live there, but she takes the board off. She realizes there's a window there.
Right? Yeah. See, she moves some old bottles of cleaning fluid or something off a shelf, and there's this like it looks like a wall. She pushes on it and it falls out like, and there's a window behind it. And it's not a nice window, right? Like
no,
it's cracked.
broken.
It's got like the webbing inside it. You know, it's you can barely see through it. It's like frosted glass. And yet, you know, there's a little bit of light in this world. You know, this like crappy looking closet. Like it's a just nice little quiet, again, no dialogue, long take sort of moment. And I didn't see that one coming, and I really like that a lot. I don't know. I sort of took that as, you know, maybe I can sleep here when my dad's an asshole. That kind of thing.
I took it more as like very metaphorical to be like my life is kind of opening up.
She's letting in the light. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's just opening up a little bit. Like I'm not. My life isn't this dank, dark closet that I have to be put into. Right. This can be more than that, even though it's not fancy, it's not huge, it's not this amazing,
but it's hers.
But it's
like
hers.
She's
exactly.
establishing herself. She's taking ownership of something.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. She's making it hers. And I really like that. And then we get the final scene with Adrian when he comes in. And again, I think what I think is impressive about the filmmaking and also the scripting, she wrote, you know, Karyn wrote the movie as well, right? We said at the beginning, is that this scene could have played out a million different ways, right? And it never really gets above, like, it never goes above like a 6 as far as like drama, right? They're talking about dramatic things, but they're staying very centered and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, he comes in and he's bruised, right? His ego is, and this is what I'm talking about, his ego is very bruised. You know, he's like, you're going to break up with me. He's like, I gave you all I got. And like, you know, like, whatever, and like my life, my kind of like my career is a joke, you know, kind of thing, and you probably don't respect me anymore. And she's like, "What are you talking about? Like, you gave me exactly what I've always wanted, which is
you showed me respect, and I showed it back to you." Yeah.
Well, and that's enough for her. And he is sort of like still sort of like I like that it's, you know, overused, but it's like this graduate type of thing, because, you know, it ends with this hug that they do. But then it has like this freeze frame and kind of this like not very happy music app comes up, and it zooms in. It's like, I think she's sort of realizing like this is, there's more than this, right? Like this, you know, like he's kind of small. Like she kind of sees he's kind of small now, right? Like
it's one of my favorite bits of dialogue in the movie too. Like after all this conversation, he says, "So are you going to dump me now?" And she says, "Probably." And like, I think she thinks she's being sarcastic, but also there's like a little bit of truth to that. Like, you know, it's a very sort of, you know, teenage girl sort of like flip sort of line. And like, obviously, you know, they hug at the end. We think they're at least ostensibly going to be together. But I do think there's a little bit of, yeah, probably eventually, right? Just like we're all going to lose. Like this probably isn't going to go the distance either.
Yeah. And this is what I mean, sort of, and when I say ego about him, I don't mean he's like this egomaniac who is out of control and is like mean about stuff. But, you know, I think like a lot of men, you know, you have an ego wrapped up in your quote unquote manliness, right? And him losing to her punctures a hole in that, right? Sure. And I don't think he's really ready to reckon with that, right? Because even though she's telling him like you shouldn't, like, this should not be a problem between us, right? Like, you know, like I don't respect you less. I don't think less of you as a person. I think you can tell by when he like kind of like the way he's reacting that he's not fully buying into what she's saying, right? Yeah. He's still kind of like, yeah, but like this sucks. Like I'm supposed to beat you. Like that's kind of the vibe that he gives off, you know? And I think she realizes it too in some ways. And it's like, do I like, you know, no congratulations, no like great job. Like I have to now comfort you because I was better than you know, like it's this whole thing where I feel like there is, and I think this is the power, right, of this being written and directed by a woman instead of written and directed by a man, because this scene would have been totally different if it was the other way around. I'm not saying a man would have made her win the fight, but there would have been a much different scene here, right, at the end. Agreed. And the scene here plays out, I think, a lot of the shades of gray that exist in a situation like this when the dynamics are flipped a little bit, you know, on their head, right? Because Adrian, I don't think would ever be like, you shouldn't be sparring, you shouldn't be training, you shouldn't be allowed to fight. But I think in his head, all the time he's like, yeah, but like, because you can tell when they're talking about the fight, like, I'm like, it's embarrassing for me even have to fight you. Like, that's not like what I like. That's below me to have to fight you. And I think it's really fascinating that she doesn't shy away from those elements.
I like it too. The beginning of the scene when he walks in, she has a black eye. She just compliments one of his punches, right? Like, and it seems kind of insincere. Like, I got to say something nice to this guy now. So let me make him feel a little bit tougher, bigger than he is. And that's a nice choice also. Like there are, again, where certain earlier scenes in the movie kind of lack subtlety and shading, like particularly when we get to the third act here, I think there's a lot more of that. And I don't know, I mean, like, do I wish the rest of the movie was this good? Yeah, but like, I'm glad it gets to this place. Like,
yeah, but it's got to build, you got to build to these moments. Every moment can't be this because you've got to have the other moments to get here. I don't
mean that. I just mean like, even the opening scene in the movie in the bathroom with the girls in high school, like it all felt very just sort of safe and similar to things that I'd seen before. And there just wasn't a lot of nuance to it, right? Like here's a high school scene with a girl, two girls getting into a fight over a guy and that sort of stuff. And here by this like late scene in the movie, there's like all these things. We know these characters so well, and there's like so much subtlety to the things they do and the things they say and the way they sort of dance around each other. And I just really, really like that. And I think, there's maybe this movie could have been better if earlier scenes had kind of had a little bit more of that. Again, I hate to use the word naturalism because I think it's such a nebulous sort of term, but I don't know. Like I'm 100% buying these last few scenes where there's some stuff earlier on where it's like, little student filmy.
See, my thing about that early first scene is that I think it is about these two girls fighting in the bathroom are fighting about or arguing about something that is very typical, right? But the sort of change up, the sort of unique thing is what Diana is sort of inserting herself into the fight about, right? It's not about the guy for her. It's about you're disrespecting my friend.
It's not a bad idea.
I'm saying like I think that is like the sort of element to the scene she's adding. She wants to give you something that I think with a lot of this movie, like we were talking about, I think sort of like the idea with this movie is, let me give you a lot of stuff that you've seen before, that you know about, that you can because I don't have a lot of money or a lot of time, where you can immediately clock who these people are, or at least who you think they are, and how they're going to behave. And then I'm going to have this one sort of wild card running through it that's going to change up a lot of the things that you are not typically seeing. One thing I want to say too is that specificity, the fact that they're doing the presidential physical fitness thing.
Oh, I liked that too. Yeah.
Gave me such flashbacks. And like, I love that most of the girls are just sort of like walking or barely running. And Diana is just like,
she's doing like pull-ups and push-ups. And
yeah, doing everything great. Yeah. Like, again, I like little things like that because I like seeing, she doesn't get a lot of, like we said, a lot of flowers for all the work she's putting in, even when she wins, right? But in that moment, she gets to see like some direct sort of like, but it also gets cut with that girl being like, oh, like doing steroids or whatever. She has to bring her down anyway. You know what I mean? And I like when she tells Marisol about what she's doing, and she's like, what the hell are you talking about? That's like,
is that the scene? There's a moment, I forget even which character asked her, like, well, why are you doing this? Why are you boxing? And she just like kind of tosses off, well, I was never going to make the cheerleading team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I tell me if I'm wrong here though. Like, are there some scenes in this movie? It's, as I said before, it's kind of this like dialogue, line, this very sort of, the back and forth is just, I don't buy it. Character walks into a scene and says a thing and then walks out.
What scene are you talking about though? In that, like,
the opening, like as you were saying, I think it's a good idea, and I get what they're going for there, but it just, I don't know. It feels a little bit like a soap opera. Like there's moments that are just, I don't know. And again, not to take away from Karyn Kusama, like by the end of this movie, I think she really kind of comes into her own as a filmmaker. And it's like, by the end of this, I can't wait to see what she does next. In the beginning, like, okay, this young filmmaker needs a little bit more practice and just sort of how to set these things up and how to make them believable and how to, work with actors. And by the end, as we were just saying, there are moments where it's like great direction. Like, I don't know.
Do you not like situational stuff? Like, I feel like I'm starting to garner from you over like some of these early episodes that we've been talking about. Like these sort of like situational setups, right? Like it's a high school. There are two girls who are going to fight and we're going to like, I'm just wondering. I'm just honestly asking you.
I don't like when the seams are showing, right? Like I don't like when something looks like these are actors being directed. And I think a very good, and it's not about the movie. Like I don't know if we were on air or off air. I just watched Beverly Hills Cop, right?
Right.
And there's some moments in that movie, it feels kind of like a TV cop show, but then Eddie Murphy is just like doing his Eddie Murphy thing and improvising and riffing and stuff like that. And the director of that, Martin Brest, is good enough to sort of like organize the scenes very, very carefully around Eddie Murphy. So Eddie Murphy can just like do that, right? Like chew the scenery and be funny and, just be sort of like verbally sort of jabbing and physically, dominating the space and stuff like that. And in this movie, for a lot of the running time, aside from the boxing stuff, I just felt like it was it felt directed. I could sort of see the director's hand and the director's, just the like, it's certainly better than I could do. I've directed. I've made some short films. I was a film student, and like
Nick,
okay,
we're critics. We're critics. You don't need to talk. You don't.
No. Hey, like just getting a movie made is a huge deal. But like absolutely. There's this sense of like when you can see people kind of hitting their marks and waiting for a person to finish talking and like that kind of stuff gets to me sometimes. And it's not about the genre. It's not about the kind of movie or how mainstream or how studio it is or I don't just watch stuff like Chop Shop, right? Like I love big studio movies. We've talked about so many of them. But when the seams really start to show like that, that's what it doesn't completely turn me off. Like I didn't start watching this movie and think, oh, this is just a cliched piece of crap. I just, it's a little bit off-putting to me. And I was so happy to see this movie because I liked the character and I liked the idea and I loved the settings and I loved the cinematography so much. It was nice to see it sort of get to that place where it got to. And again, I do feel like, and I don't want to read too much into any of this, but it feels like, and it probably wasn't shot in order because movies are not, but it really feels like Kusama gets better and better and all of this, all the elements just continue to improve and have like different colors and shadings and subtleties at the end of this movie that we just don't get at all in the beginning. And, it's like by the end of this, I am firmly rooting for Karyn Kusama and, we'll talk about where her career went after this and how maybe she did not get the greatest deal out of the whole thing.
Hollywood came a knocking right after this. And you can see why, right? Like I said, like if this is not like we said, like an experimental indie, right? This feels like very much
right in their wheelhouse. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is a big part of why, happens. But again, the next movie we're going to talk about is Aeon Flux, right? It doesn't happen until 2005.
Yeah.
Right? And this movie comes out in 2000. So once again, it's just one of the things where like, we'll do some research on what happened between those two movies, but most other filmmakers who make this movie, which is a relative success, right? It comes out, it gets a lot of attention. I remember hearing about it, right? When it came out at the time, being a film fan. It was in
all the indie film magazines. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure this was a Film Threat cover.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. It doesn't make a lot of money. It makes like $1.5 million at the box office, but it cost $1 million, right? And it got really good reviews. Big reviews. Roger Ebert gave it a 3.5 out of 4 stars. All this kind of stuff. It's nominated for awards at Sundance. It's got all of this kind of stuff. That it's got all those things about it, right? That that are meant to be like, okay, this is an indie hit, like a well-liked indie. You will get to make whatever movie you want to make next for, $3 million or whatever, $5 million, whatever it is. And for some reason it doesn't happen. Right. And then she ends up directing Aeon Flux, which we know is a disaster. Right. And then we'll very much talk about how it almost destroyed her career for good. after she makes Aeon Flux.
Yes. I mean, in my ideal world, she made a movie in 2002 with Michelle Rodriguez, another sort of low-key indie drama, maybe a slightly bigger scale than this. And, you know, that's the
by
idea.
2002...
And probably in her ideal world, too.
Yes. 2002, Michelle Rodriguez is a movie star. She's in the Fast and Furious. Everyone knows who she is. Like, that movie definitely, if she does like a low-key thriller or whatever with her, it probably makes $30 million, you know, and probably costs 10, and, you know, and then you build a career that way, right? Because this is still the era where you can do that, where you can build a career that way. It doesn't happen. I guess come up a lot.
I mean, I was thinking about Michelle Rodriguez. Like, I know she's in that franchise. I know she did a little bit of, I think, season 3 or so of Lost. Like, is she a movie star by
season
2002?
Season 2 of Lost.
Season 2 of Lost. Sorry. Yeah, she was that group of people where it's like, why are we introducing more characters now?
Don't say anything bad about the tailies. We can have this conversation another time.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what they're called.
Yeah.
Well, she's Fast and the Furious is literally the next year. It's 2001.
Is she in the original? That's what I was wondering. Okay.
Oh yeah. Right. She's Letty. She's Dom's love interest in the first movie.
Long time since we've talked about them on the show before.
Yeah. The first one is a terrible movie, but it's a huge hit.
Yeah.
You know. And then in 2002, she's in Resident Evil. She's one of the stars of Resident Evil, which is also a pretty sizable hit. She's in Blue Crush. She's in SWAT. SWAT underrated movie, to be honest with you. And then she sort of gets into this kind of until basically Fast and the Furious comes back calling and Avatar comes around. About she goes with this like a 6-year period where she's doing all terrible schlock. Basically,
she ran into she had like a DUI or something.
She did. Well, that was during Lost.
Oh, was it? Yeah, and
yes.
that's right. Right, is in Hawaii.
She was one of like 10 actors who got DUIs during the Lost
of that. And yeah, I kind of felt bad for her there because
she's great on Lost. By the way, she's great in her little portion. I've always been a fan of hers.
I've always liked her and stuff. I've seen her, and I don't remember her in Lost at all. And I did watch that show right up until the very brutal end of it.
Okay, we could have a whole other argument about this because I can't even believe you just said that. But like I think a very interesting actress who I think again, but not someone that actress that Hollywood can slot into their normal stuff very easily, right? She doesn't fit into the buckets very easily.
No, not at all.
You know, I think she's a good actress. I think she's very pretty, but she's pretty in a very unusual way for Hollywood, right? She's very intense. She feels so capable. Like it's very, all the time. And I think we saw in this movie, she's capable of playing, open and sort of, emotional, but most movies don't use her that way, right? She's just a tough ass who scowls at people and, and ends up sometimes being the bad guy. Like that's kind of like what she ends up getting thrown into for most of her career. And that's a shame, right? But it's one of the things where when you don't fit into a specific bucket for Hollywood, you don't end up having the career you maybe should. And also, it also happened that she got so big so fast that I thought she probably became too expensive to do little stuff. And so little filmmakers aren't looking necessarily for her type either. She's a very specific type, and so.
And how many audiences, like how many people who like her and who have seen her in those big franchise movies, stuff like SWAT and the Fast and Furious, like how many of them know about Girlfight, right? Like,
yeah.
If you like Michelle Rodriguez, like this is the Michelle Rodriguez movie. This is the one that launched her. This is one that, I mean, has she ever been better than that? I can't imagine she has because she's so good in this.
Probably not. No, I mean, look at her rest of her career. She never really is able to do
That's what
a movie like this ever again.
Her fault, but yeah.
She is extremely, she's very good at doing big movies and playing action movies. She's very good at it, but she never really gets a chance to do this again. I mean, she is fantastic in that Dungeons and Dragons movie that came out last year. She is amazing. She's fantastic in it. And she's very funny in it too, which is something she also never really gets to do in anything. So I was extremely impressed by this movie. I think a lot of when we talked about with Kaczynski stuff, I couched a lot of, my praise was kind of halvesies a lot of the time with a lot of stuff that he did. Right. And I just feel like Karyn Kusama immediately in this movie, I'm like, this is like a real, not that Kaczynski's not a real filmmaker, so I don't want to compare it to that, but she's just like a filmmaker. She just, you know, you can feel it, like you said, developing and happening in real time in this movie, like her getting better as the movie goes along. And it's just one of those things where I can't believe it's so crazy to now be 25 years later and to be like, she made 4 movies or whatever it was, you know, since then. That's crazy. I'm so fascinated.
So much of that is the industry and
yes,
the things that were happening. As I said, she kind of caught the tail end of that like indie movie boom in the 90s. But like by this time, that's kind of over, you know? And then we get like the movies, you know, when I was in college and after that, and when I was sort of writing, when I got out of college, like there was a lot of like big, like that's when the franchises are really kicking in and the indie stuff has a little tougher of a time to like make an impression. And then you have like the sort of the Christopher Nolans of the world, like these indie filmmakers that are sort of immediately huge scale even before they have a movie that is made for those kind of budgets. And like it's almost like there never really was a chance for a Karyn Kusama to really, you know, do anything other than studio stuff. And
and then she does a bunch of she does a bunch of television. We're going to talk about Yellow Jackets, you know, at the end of this series. She does a lot of television along the way, you know, but it's not like she was like, you know, directing 10 episodes of television a year. You know, she was directing like a couple. Yeah. So she was working, you know, but it's just one of those things. And we'll talk about it as we go along. But I think this is a hell of a debut for a filmmaker. It's a hell of a first film for a filmmaker to put out there. And there's a lot of self-assuredness and a lot of, you can already see her thematic bents and the way she deals with actors and all of this stuff. I have never seen Aeon Flux. Have you seen Aeon Flux?
I have not.
I am really curious about what it looks like, how it feels, what, if anything, we can see of her in it.
That's what I'm most interested in, right? Like, did you watch the show?
The Liquid Television show.
I watched a lot of that back in the day.
Yeah, I watched a bunch of that as well, which I was excited when the movie was coming out because I was like, oh, cool, this is a really cool thing. And then the trailers looked terrible. And then the movie got like the worst reviews in the world.
Well, it did not look like it captured any of the flavor of what I liked about that show. So I kind of just avoided it. And certainly when I saw it, it's like, you know, not to date us again, but Borderlands came out this week. And I was that seems to be the same kind of thing, right? Like a studio took this sort of edgy IP and, you know, sanded off everything that was interesting about it and put an interesting filmmaker in charge of it, but didn't let him do the thing that he does. And I don't know. I have not seen it. Like, wouldn't it be cool if it was like a hidden gem? If it was like a speed racer?
I don't think it's going to be a hidden gem, but
I'm going into it open-minded, right? Like,
I think by now we would have heard of that.
Karyn Kusama can do. I'm going to go into it very optimistic, and maybe we'll see something in the Aeon Flux that nobody else did.
I hope we do. I mean, I'm excited to watch it because I
am too. Yeah,
you know, I've been watching a lot of famous bombs over the last couple of weeks. I watched The Postman. I watched Geely like a couple weeks ago, you know, because I was going through the Martin Brest movies. So speaking of Beverly Hills Cop, like you were talking about before, and this is one of those like famous bombs. So, but honestly, I'm excited to watch that movie. And then I love both of the next 2 movies. So I'm really excited to watch them again after that. Like Jennifer's Body and The Invitation are both fantastic. So I'm really excited to watch those movies again and really talk about them critically.
It's wild. I've seen a lot more of Kusama's work than I had of Kaczynski's.
Kaczynski's?
Yeah.
I know. Me too. And then, you know, we'll figure out how we're doing after that. But I think this was a good talk on Girlfight. I think we'll see you next week for Aeon Flux. See how that all goes down. But until then, thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you to everybody who is listening. And until next time, be good to one another. Later.